We recently had a question about how to go about creating a roof with bonnet hips using RailClone. It's an interesting problem that we felt would be useful for other users, so we've recorded our answer as a short tutorial. This technique can be completed with the free light version of RailClone, so if you've not tried it before, this might be just the excuse you need. So here's the issue. Because the hip and the valley tiles bend around the corners and connect neatly to the rows on both pitches of a roof, it's not really possible to use our usual technique of creating clipping splines for each roof plane. Instead, you can solve it slightly differently, by treating each row as a separate 1D array that wraps around the perimeter of the roof in an unbroken loop. Here's how to set it up. First of all, you'll need to create a spline for each row of tiles that wraps around the entire roof. There are a number of ways you could do this, but in this scene, the easiest way is to simply select all of the edges that define the hips and the valleys, and then use the Edit PolyObjects Connect tool to create an edge loop for each row. Then with the new edges still selected, click on Create Shape from Selection. Change the shape type to linear and click OK. And now that you have the splines you need, you'll just need to create a tile using a simple box primitive. Set the height of the tile so that it spans 2 rows. This will allow each course to overlap. Clone the tile and set the width to slightly more than the height. We'll use this as the hip tile, and because it bends around the corners, you'll also need to add some vertical edge loops. Clone this tile again to create a third tile that we'll use for the valleys. If you reselect the hip tiles, you may want to add a face below the tile that we can use to add a concrete infill. If you download the scene files for this tutorial, you'll find example geometry that you can use to follow along. So now that we have our tile geometry, let's create the RailClone style itself. Add a new RailClone object and open the style editor. Add a new linear generator and attach a spline node. In the spline node's properties, pick the path from the scene that we created earlier. Add a new segment node and select the tile geometry from the scene. Go to the deform properties and disable slice. Then wire the segment to the default input. Use the segment's fixed Y rotation to rotate the tiles to match the angle of the roof. You'll notice as the tiles turn that they lift off of the roof planes. To fix this, you just need to change the Y and the Z alignment to pivot. This prevents RailClone from using the bounding box. Add some left and right padding to add spacing between the tiles. If you find that some of the rows also rotate incorrectly, then it's because the splines are running in different directions. And unfortunately, this often happens when using the PolyObjects Create Splines tool, but it's easy to fix. Just select the incorrect subsplines, right click and select reverse. Problem solved. Now go to the generator's properties and change the default mode to adaptive. In this mode, the geometry will be subtly scaled so that only whole tiles fit on each row, with no slicing. Clone the existing segment to reuse the settings, and use it to pick the hip tile from the scene. Wire it to the corner input. Select the generator and go to the corner settings. Increase the fillet amount until the tile deforms smoothly around the corner. For even cleaner deformation, you may also want to increase the curve steps property, which is found in the style rollout. So once we have the corners deforming correctly, we'll need to reshape the tile so that it has that distinctive bonnet hip profile. So select the source geometry and add a box FFD modifier. Set the number of points to 2 by 5 by 2. Then use the control points to pull up the centre of the front of the tile until it overlaps on the hip correctly. By modelling this and being able to see the results live, you can save a lot of time versus relying on trial and error. And that solves the hips. But what about the valleys? For these, we'll need to use a different tile, and to do that, we turn to the conditional operator. So wire a conditional operator to the corner input, and wire the hip segment to the true input of the conditional operator. Clone the existing hip segment, and use it to select the valley geometry from the scene. Then wire the valley segment to the false input. Now, to get RailClone to use the hip on the external corners and the valley on the internal corners, we need to enable vertex angle in the conditional operator and use a value of 180 degrees. Make sure check wide angle is enabled, otherwise it will only check between 0 and 180 degrees rather than the full 360 degrees that we need. And finally, change the condition drop down to less. You now have a different tile for each corner type. All that remains is to reshape the valley. So select the valley source geometry, and just like we did for the hip, add a box FFD modifier with the number of points set to 2 by 5 by 2. Then use those control points to pull down the center at the back of the tile until it overlaps in the valley correctly. And we're done. The only other thing I did in the sample scene was to add UVW X-form modifiers to randomly offset the bitmaps on the U and V axis to add just a little more variety. So this was a nice example of a tutorial that was made from a user's request. And remember, if you've got a question you'd like to see explained in a short tutorial, just let us know on the forum or in the comments below this video. Thanks, and stay tuned for more coming soon.